Archaeologists have found game boards older than the pyramids, dice older than most religions, instruments older than agriculture itself, which means somewhere in the fossil record, buried next to evidence of survival, is evidence of something else entirely: boredom. And the way ancient humans solved it wasn't a distraction from survival. It might have been one of the reasons our species survived at all. Here's the assumption we all walk around with. Prehistoric life was non-stop crisis. Hunt something, avoid being hunted, find water, find shelter, repeat until you die, probably young, probably violently. There's no room in that picture for downtime. No room for a Stone Age human sitting around with absolutely nothing to do. Except that picture is wrong, not slightly wrong, fundamentally wrong. Anthropologists, who actually study surviving hunter-gatherer societies, groups like the Hadza of Tanzania or the Kung of the Kalahari, keep finding the same uncomfortable pattern. These groups often spend somewhere between 15 and 20 hours a week on actual subsistence work, hunting, gathering, food prep. That's it. That's the whole grind. The rest of the week they're not doing anything close to what we picture. They're sitting, talking, resting, existing. Compare that to the average work week most of you are reading this on a lunch break from. The math is not flattering for modern life. So if early humans weren't constantly on the edge of death, if there were real, regular stretches of nothing, then early humans had a problem we don't usually give them credit for having: boredom. And boredom, it turns out, is not a soft problem. It's a survival problem in disguise. The enforced idleness season. Let's talk about weather, because weather might be the most underrated force in the history of human creativity. In a lot of ancient environments, there were entire seasons where you simply could not do the things that kept you alive. Monsoon seasons across parts of Africa and Asia. Brutal winters across Ice Age Europe, storms that could last for days. During those stretches, hunting parties didn't go out, gathering trips got cancelled. Entire bands of early humans were stuck inside shelters, caves, huts, tents made of hide, for hours, sometimes days, with nothing to do but sit with each other. No phones, no fire to stare at yet, in the earliest cases, just other humans, and time, and a brain that evolved to solve problems, suddenly presented with a problem it had never had to solve before. What do you do with your mind when there's nothing left to hunt, gather, or flee from? Ethnographic accounts from groups living in seasonally harsh environments describe exactly this rhythm repeating year after year. Weeks of intense, coordinated activity during a hunting window or a harvest, followed by long stretches where the entire camp is essentially waiting. Waiting for weather to break, waiting for animals to migrate back into range, waiting for a river to drop low enough to cross. That waiting wasn't empty time carved out of an otherwise busy life. For a meaningful chunk of the year, waiting practically was the life. This is where the first micro-answer comes in, and it's a strange one. The brain doesn't just idle, left with nothing external to focus on, it starts generating its own content. Modern neuroscientists have a name for this: the default mode network, a set of brain regions that activate specifically when you're not focused on a task, when you're daydreaming, remembering, imagining. It's the same network active when you stare out a car window and drift off into thought. That network almost certainly existed in early humans too, which means the very first bored human wasn't blank. Their brain was already quietly building the raw material for stories, plans, and games, whether they consciously chose to or not. But an idle brain generating private thoughts is one thing. What ancient humans did next is the part that actually built civilization, the oldest game in the world. Here's a fact that tends to surprise people. Humans have been playing games, structured, rule-based, repeatable games, for a genuinely staggering amount of time. The Royal Game of a board game played with dice and tokens, dates back roughly 4,600 years to ancient Mesopotamia, and archaeologists have found the rules written on a clay tablet, meaning we can actually still play it correctly today. Senet, an Egyptian board game, shows up in tombs dating back over 5,000 years, buried alongside pharaohs because it was considered important enough to bring into the afterlife. Think about that for a second. Ancient Egyptians didn't just play a board game for fun. They believed it mattered enough to pack for eternity. And it goes back further than boards and tablets. The oldest known dice, found at a site called Burnt City in Iran, are close to 5,000 years old, carved from bone, and they're paired with a game board that still has game pieces sitting in position, frozen mid-match for 5 millennia. Long before that, humans were almost certainly using knuckle bones, the small ankle bones of sheep and goats, as an early form of dice. They're roughly six-sided by nature, they tumble unpredictably, and archaeological sites across the ancient world are littered with them, worn smooth from repeated handling. Worn smooth, not from tool use. From being picked up, thrown, and picked up again, over and over, by people who wanted something to do. Which brings up an uncomfortable follow-up question. If you have dice, you don't just have a game, you have the seed of something else. Gambling, betting your life away, sort of. The moment you introduce randomness into a game, humans do something almost universal. We bet on it. Historians and anthropologists studying ancient gambling behavior have found evidence of wagering stretching back thousands of years across wildly unconnected cultures: ancient China, ancient Rome, ancient Mesoamerica, none of them in contact with each other, all of them independently arriving at the same idea. Stake something, roll something random, win or lose based on chance. This isn't a footnote. Some researchers argue that games of chance functioned as an early form of social technology, a low-stakes way to practice risk, negotiation, and trust within a group, all while filling hours that would otherwise sit empty. A bored human with knucklebones and a friend willing to bet a piece of dried meat on the outcome wasn't wasting time. They were rehearsing skills that mattered everywhere else in their life. Reading another person's face, managing risk, handling loss without falling apart. The scratches that weren't art. Now let's go somewhere darker and older. A cave. At Blombos Cave in South Africa, archaeologists uncovered pieces of ochre, a soft reddish stone, engraved with deliberate, repeated crosshatch patterns. These engravings are roughly 73,000 years old, among the oldest deliberate markings ever attributed to a human hand. For years, researchers debated what they meant. Some assumed decoration, some assumed early symbolic communication, but part of the honest answer is simpler and stranger. Some of these marks may not have meant anything at all. They may have simply been made because making them felt satisfying, because a hand holding a sharp stone against a soft one, dragging it back and forth in a rhythm, is a deeply human way to occupy restless attention. You've done a version of this, doodling in the margin of a notebook during a meeting you weren't listening to, tapping a pen against a desk in a pattern that means absolutely nothing. Ancient humans dragging a stone across ochre for no functional reason at all might be the oldest fidget habit on Earth, and it happened tens of thousands of years before anyone invented the concept of art as a category separate from thing you make when your hands need something to do. Deeper into cave systems in France and Spain, alongside the famous painted bison and horses, researchers have also found something stranger: patterns of deliberate scratches, tallies, and dots that don't depict anything representational at all. For a long time these were treated as an afterthought next to the paintings. Some researchers now argue at least some of these are early forms of counting, lunar tracking, or simple games, marks made and remade across repeated visits to the same wall, in the dark, by firelight, by people who had time on their hands and a wall in front of them. The Fire Circle Broadcast Network. Fire changes everything about how humans kill time, and it's worth pausing on why. Before controlled fire, once the sun went down, that was it. Darkness ended the day. There was nothing to do but sleep. But once humans could keep a fire burning through the night, they had something no other animal had: extra hours, usable, wakeful, social hours, every single night, for the rest of human history. Anthropologist Polly Weissner spent years studying the Juhonsi San people of the Kalahari and found something remarkable when comparing daytime and nighttime conversation. During the day, conversation was mostly practical: complaints, gossip, logistics, who did what to whom. But at night, around the fire, conversation shifted dramatically towards storytelling. Roughly 80% of nighttime talk was narrative, folklore, myth, humor. The fire wasn't just light and warmth, it was a nightly switch that flipped a hunter-gatherer band from information exchange mode into entertainment mode. This matters more than it sounds like it should. Storytelling around a fire does three things at once. It kills the empty hours after dark. It transmits survival knowledge, which plants are poisonous, where predators tend to be, in a format people actually remember. And it builds something anthropologists call social cohesion, the sense of shared identity that turns a scattered group of individuals into a band willing to protect each other. Boredom, in other words, may have been the pressure that invented the campfire story, and the campfire story may have been one of the reasons humans out-cooperated every other species on the planet. The flute that shouldn't exist. Here's where the evidence gets genuinely startling. In a cave called Hohlefels in Germany, archaeologists recovered a flute carved from the wing bone of a griffon vulture, with 5 carefully spaced finger holes. It's estimated to be somewhere around 40,000 years old. Whoever made it didn't just want noise, they wanted specific, controllable, repeatable pitch, which means they wanted music, in something close to the way we'd recognize it today. Making that flute wasn't quick. It required selecting the right bone, hollowing it precisely without cracking it, and carving holes in exactly the right places to produce a usable scale. That's hours of careful, non-survival-related labor, performed by a species that was, according to the old assumption, supposedly too busy fighting off saber-toothed cats to have any spare time at all. Music does something games and doodling don't quite do on their own. It synchronizes people. Research on music and social bonding has repeatedly found that group singing, clapping, and rhythmic movement trigger a release of endorphins and increase feelings of trust and closeness between the people doing it together, even more than simply talking does. A bored band of early humans banging out a rhythm on a hollow log or blowing across a carved bone wasn't just filling silence. They were literally synchronizing their nervous systems with the people they'd need to trust the next time something with teeth showed up. Picking bugs out of each other's hair, and why that mattered. This next one sounds almost too simple to matter, but grooming, physically picking through another person's hair, skin, or fur, removing dirt, insects, and debris, might be one of the oldest boredom killers of all, and one of the most socially important. Primatologist Robin Dunbar has spent decades studying grooming behavior in primates, and argues that for early hominins, grooming functioned as a bonding mechanism long before language existed. Chimpanzees spend enormous amounts of their downtime grooming each other, not because they're constantly covered in parasites, but because grooming triggers a release of endorphins in both the groomer and the groomed, creating trust, calming social tension, and cementing alliances. Dunbar's theory, and it's a genuinely compelling one, is that as human groups grew larger, physical grooming eventually became too time-consuming to maintain every relationship one-on-one, and language itself may have evolved partly as a kind of vocal grooming, a way to maintain social bonds with more people at once, through gossip and conversation instead of picking through hair. If that's true, then one of humanity's most important inventions, language, might trace part of its origin back to bored primates with idle hands and social itches to scratch, wearing your boredom on a string. There's one more category worth mentioning, and it's easy to overlook because it looks decorative rather than functional: jewelry. At Blombos Cave and at Skull Cave in Israel, archaeologists have found perforated shell beads, deliberately pierced, strung, and worn, dating back over 100,000 years. Making one of these beads wasn't fast. Someone had to select a shell, carefully puncture it without shattering it using a sharp stone point, and then string it, likely with plant fiber or sinew. Multiply that by dozens of beads needed for a single necklace, and you're looking at hours of fiddly, repetitive, meditative craftwork performed by people with absolutely no functional need for a necklace to survive the next predator encounter. But that's exactly the point. The bead wasn't for survival, it was for identity, status, belonging, and it was almost certainly also just something to do with your hands while sitting inside a shelter waiting out a storm. Craftwork like this shows up again and again across the archaeological record, wherever humans had stretches of enforced downtime, which suggests boredom wasn't just tolerated by early humans, it was quietly, consistently productive. The idle brain problem. Let's zoom out, because there's a real scientific mechanism tying all of this together, and it's worth understanding clearly. An idle human brain isn't actually idle. That default mode network we mentioned earlier doesn't switch off when you stop hunting or gathering. It switches into a different mode entirely, one associated with imagination, memory, planning, and social simulation, essentially running mental rehearsals of situations that haven't happened yet. Modern psychologists studying boredom have found that it functions less like an empty state and more like a signal, a kind of internal alarm that pushes a person to seek novelty, stimulation, or meaning. Boredom is uncomfortable specifically because discomfort is motivating. An early human sitting in a cave with nothing to do wasn't relaxing. They were, on some unconscious level, agitated enough to start scratching patterns into ochre, carving holes into bone, or stringing shells onto sinew, because the discomfort of doing nothing was worse than the effort of doing something. In other words, boredom may not have been a bug in the early human experience. It might have been a feature, a built-in evolutionary nudge that turned enforced downtime into invention. The same restless discomfort that makes you reach for your phone the second a line at the grocery store gets too long is, in a very real sense, the exact same mechanism that once pushed a hunter-gatherer to pick up a bone and carve 5 holes into it. Imagine a simple act of kindness, like making a child's imaginary game real. Which brings us to the collision this whole video has been circling. You live in a world engineered specifically to never let you feel bored, ever, for even a few seconds. Notifications, infinite scroll, autoplay, all of it exists to intercept the exact discomfort that once produced music, storytelling, jewelry, and games. Modern boredom doesn't get a chance to build anything anymore, because it gets solved for you, instantly, by something designed to be more immediately rewarding than sitting with your own idle brain. Ancient humans didn't have that option. They had the discomfort, and nothing to make it go away except their own hands and their own minds. So they built things, a game board scratched into dirt, A rhythm on a hollow bone. A story told the same way for the 1000th time because the fire was still burning and nobody wanted to sleep yet. So how did ancient humans kill boredom? The honest answer is they didn't kill it at all. They used it. Every game board, every carved flute, every string of shell beads, every myth passed down by firelight exists because a bored human somewhere refused to just sit there and do nothing. Boredom wasn't the enemy of survival. It might have been one of the engines of it, quietly building the games, the art, the music, and the stories that eventually became the entire foundation of human culture. Next time you're standing in a slow line with nothing to do, and you feel that itch to reach for your phone, that itch is old. Genuinely, deeply old. It's the same itch that carved a flute out of a vulture's wing bone 40,000 years ago. The tools you reach for now are different. The itch underneath them has been there the whole time. There's one difference worth sitting with though. Every one of those ancient responses to boredom, the game, the story,